Y'all, I'm standing here in my mama's Florida garage at 7 in the morning holding this yellowed wedding dress that's been locked away for 50 years. And honey, I can barely breathe because what I just discovered about my own mother's life is going to change everything I thought I knew about our family.
My name is Dorothy. I'm 72 years old, and 3 days ago, my mama Evelyn passed away in her little retirement community here in Sarasota, Florida. And when I came to clean out her belongings, I found something that's made me question every single story she ever told me about her past. Now, before I tell you what happened next, and sweetie, this part is going to absolutely shock you. If you're loving this story, smash that subscribe button and hit that bell because, honey, I get so excited when I see y'all in the comments. Speaking of which, what state are you calling home right now? Drop it down below and tell me, have you ever discovered something about your parents that completely turned your world upside down? Because your stories help me know I'm not alone in this crazy world. Now let me tell you what I found, because what Mama had been hiding was about to rock my entire foundation. See, Mama always told us she'd only been married once, to my daddy, Robert, and that they'd had a simple courthouse wedding back in 1952 in Ohio before they moved down to Florida. She'd say with this wistful little smile, "Dorothy, honey, your daddy and I were too poor for a fancy wedding, so we just went down to the justice of the peace with 2 witnesses and called it good." I believed that story my whole life, never questioned it, because Mama was always so straightforward about everything. But y'all, when I opened that cedar chest she kept locked in her bedroom closet underneath her good linens and photo albums, there was this absolutely stunning ivory silk wedding dress with hand-sewn beadwork and a cathedral train that would have cost more money than Daddy made in 6 months back in 1952. The dress was wrapped in tissue paper so carefully like it was spun gold. And when I lifted it out, honey, my hands were shaking because attached to the hanger was a little envelope with Evelyn Marie Thompson, June 15th, 1951, written in Mama's handwriting. Thompson wasn't Mama's maiden name, sweetie. Her maiden name was Miller. And June 15th, 1951 was a full year before she supposedly married my daddy. I had to sit down right there on her bedroom floor because my head was spinning faster than a tornado in Kansas. Inside that envelope was a wedding photograph, and y'all, I nearly dropped it when I saw Mama looking absolutely radiant in that same dress, standing next to a tall, dark-haired man I'd never seen before in my life. The church behind them was this gorgeous stone building with stained glass windows, nothing like the simple courthouse story she'd always told us. Written on the back in faded blue ink was Mr. and Mrs. James Thompson, Sacred Heart Catholic Church, Cleveland, Ohio, June 15, 1951. James Thompson, not Robert Harrison, my daddy. James Thompson, whom Mama had apparently been married to for an entire year before she even met Daddy. Honey, I felt like the ground had just opened up and swallowed me whole. Everything I thought I knew about my mama's past was crumbling like old newspaper. I'm sitting there in her empty bedroom surrounded by moving boxes and the smell of her lavender talcum powder still lingering in the air, holding proof that my mama had been living a lie for over 70 years. But why? What happened to James Thompson? Why did she hide this marriage from all of us? And sweetie, that was just the beginning of what I was about to discover. I searched through every single box, every drawer, every hiding place Mama might have used, and that's when I found the letters. Y'all, there were dozens of them, tied with a faded blue ribbon and hidden inside her sewing basket under her old patterns. Letters addressed to my dearest Evelyn in the most beautiful handwriting I'd ever seen, all signed "Forever yours, James." The dates on these letters went from June 1951 all the way through March 1952. And honey, reading them felt like I was peeking into the most intimate moments of Mama's young heart. James wrote to her like she was the most precious thing in the world. My darling Evelyn, every morning I wake up grateful that God saw fit to make you mine. Your laugh is the sweetest sound I've ever heard. And when you smile at me across the breakfast table, I know I'm the luckiest man alive. These weren't just love letters, sweetie. They were the kind of passionate, devoted words that made me understand why Mama had kept that wedding dress for 50 years. This man had loved her with everything he had. But the letters stopped abruptly in March 1952, and the last one made my heart break for Mama in a way I never expected. James wrote, "Evelyn, my darling, the doctors say there's nothing more they can do. I want you to know that these 8 months as your husband have been the happiest of my life. Please don't spend years mourning me. Find love again. Be happy. Raise those children we dreamed about. You're so young, sweetheart, and you have so much life ahead of you. All I ask is that you remember me as the man who loved you more than life itself." Y'all, I'm sitting there crying over a letter written 70 years ago to my mama from a husband I never knew existed. James Thompson had died just 8 months after their wedding, probably from cancer or some other illness they couldn't treat back then. Mama had been a widow at 20 years old, and instead of telling us about this great love she'd lost, she'd hidden it away like it was something shameful. But honey, there was more to this story, and what I found next made me realize just how deep Mama's secret life really went. At the bottom of that sewing basket was a small wooden box I'd never seen before. And inside were 2 wedding rings, a simple gold band, and the most beautiful engagement ring with a diamond that caught the Florida sunshine streaming through Mama's bedroom window and threw rainbows across the walls. There was also a bank book from First National Bank of Cleveland dated 1952, showing that James had left Mama with a substantial inheritance when he died, more money than our family ever seemed to have when I was growing up. See, we'd always lived modestly. Daddy worked construction, Mama took in sewing and cleaned houses part-time, and we kids always thought we were just regular working class folks getting by. But according to this bank book, Mama had come to Florida with enough money to buy a house outright, maybe even start a business. Instead, she'd apparently hidden away James's inheritance and lived like she didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. But why, sweetie? Why would she hide being financially secure when she didn't have to? That's when I remembered something that had always puzzled me about Mama's behavior. Every few months throughout my childhood, she'd disappear for an afternoon saying she had errands to run in town, but she'd always come back looking sad and distant. Daddy would ask if she was all right, and she'd just nod and said she'd visited an old friend. I'd forgotten about those mysterious trips until now, but suddenly they took on a whole different meaning. I decided I needed to drive to the old part of Sarasota where Mama used to go on those errands. And honey, what I found there made everything click into place like pieces of a puzzle I'd been trying to solve my whole life. There's a beautiful little Catholic cemetery on the outskirts of town, Sacred Heart Cemetery. And when I walked through those gates, I knew exactly what I was looking for.
It took me an hour of walking through rows of headstones before I found it. But there it was, a simple granite marker that read, James Michael Thompson, beloved husband, 1925-1952. Until we meet again. Y'all, the grass around that headstone was recently trimmed. There were fresh flowers in the little vase, and the stone looked like it had been lovingly cleaned just days before. My 70-year-old mama had been visiting her first husband's grave for decades, keeping his memory alive while never telling a soul about him. I knelt down in front of that headstone and just sobbed, honey. Not just for James Thompson, who died so young, but for my mama, who'd carried this enormous grief and love in her heart for 70 years without ever sharing it with anyone. She loved this man so completely that even after marrying Daddy and having 3 children and building a whole new life, she couldn't let go of him. Those monthly trips weren't errands at all. They were sacred visits to the love of her life. But I still had questions, sweetie. How had James ended up buried in Florida if they'd lived in Ohio? How had Mama afforded to bring his body here and buy a plot in an expensive cemetery? And most importantly, did Daddy know about any of this? I drove back to Mama's house with my head spinning, and that's when I decided to call my older brother Michael and see if he remembered anything about Mama's mysterious trips. Michael's 68 now, lives up in Jacksonville with his wife, and when I told him what I'd found, there was this long silence on the phone. Finally, he said, "Dorothy, I've been wondering if this day would ever come. I found out about James Thompson 25 years ago." Y'all, I nearly dropped that phone. My own brother had known about Mama's first marriage for 25 years and never said a word? Michael explained that back in 1998, when Daddy had his first heart attack and was in the hospital, Mama had been so distraught that she'd accidentally let James' name slip while she was talking to the chaplain. She'd said, "I can't lose another husband, Father. I couldn't survive losing Robert the way I lost James." Michael had overheard and confronted Mama about it later, and she'd broken down and told him everything. According to Michael, Mama had met James when she was just 19, working as a telephone operator in Cleveland. He was a young accountant who'd just come back from serving in World War II, and they'd fallen madly in love within weeks of meeting. They had had this beautiful wedding at Sacred Heart Catholic Church with all their friends and family, and honey, Mama said those 8 months as James's wife were the happiest time of her entire life. But when James got sick with what they later figured out was cancer, there were no treatments like we have today. Mama spent every penny of their savings trying to save him, taking him to specialists in Chicago and New York, but nothing worked. When he died, she was not only heartbroken, but also facing a mountain of medical bills that would have bankrupted her. That's when James's life insurance came through, a substantial policy he'd taken out through his accounting firm. Mama used that money to pay off the medical bills and then made a decision that would change the rest of her life. She couldn't stand staying in Cleveland where everything reminded her of James, so she bought a plot in a Catholic cemetery in Sarasota, had James's body moved there, and used the rest of his inheritance to start fresh in Florida. She'd met Daddy at a church social just 6 months later, and when he'd asked about her past, she'd been too raw with grief to explain about James, so she just said she'd never been married before. Michael told me that Mama had planned to tell Daddy the truth after they'd been married for a while, but then I came along, and then our youngest sister Sarah, and the years just kept passing, and the lie got bigger and harder to undo. She was terrified that Daddy would feel like he was competing with a ghost, or that he'd think she'd married him just because she was lonely and needed financial security. So she hid James's inheritance, lived modestly so Daddy would never question where any extra money came from, and visited James's grave in secret for decades. Y'all, when Michael finished explaining all this, I felt like my entire understanding of our family had just been rewritten. Mama hadn't been dishonest out of shame or deception. She was protecting everyone she loved from a complicated truth that she didn't know how to handle. She loved James with the kind of passionate, desperate love you only get once in a lifetime. But she'd also genuinely loved Daddy in a different, gentler way. She'd been carrying both loves in her heart for 70 years, never allowing herself to fully grieve James because she didn't want to hurt Daddy, and never fully celebrating her marriage to Daddy because she felt guilty about James. But honey, there was still one more piece of this puzzle that I hadn't figured out yet. If Mama had been visiting James's grave all these years, and if she'd kept his inheritance hidden all this time, what had she been planning on doing with it? The bank book I'd found was old, but there had to be more recent financial records somewhere. That's when I remembered that Mama had always done her banking at a little community bank here in Sarasota, and I wondered if she'd maintained a separate account there that none of us knew about. The next morning, I drove to First Community Bank with Mama's birth certificate and the old bank book, hoping they could help me figure out what had happened to James's money over the decades. The customer service representative, this sweet lady named Patricia, who remembered Mama from her weekly visits, pulled up her records and her face just lit up with the biggest smile. "Oh, honey, your Mama was one of our most special customers. She had 3 accounts with us, the regular checking account you kids knew about, and 2 others that she'd set up as trust funds." Trust funds! Y'all, I nearly fell out of that chair. Mama had set up trust funds? Patricia explained that Mama had been depositing James's life insurance money into investment accounts for over 60 years, and with compound interest and careful management, that original inheritance had grown into a substantial sum. But here's the part that made me cry right there in the bank, sweetie. Mama had set up one trust fund for the maintenance of James Thompson's gravesite in perpetuity, ensuring that someone would always care for his resting place even after she was gone. The second trust fund was designated for her children and grandchildren with specific instructions that it should be distributed after her death with a letter explaining its origin. Patricia handed me an envelope that Mama had left with the bank years ago with instructions to give it to her children when she passed. My hands were shaking as I opened it because I knew this letter was going to be Mama's final attempt to explain the secret she'd kept for so long. Y'all, what she wrote made me understand just how much she'd been struggling with this burden all these years. "My dearest children," the letter began, in Mama's careful handwriting, "if you're reading this, then I'm finally at peace, and it's time for you to know the truth about the money I'm leaving you. This inheritance doesn't come from your father and me. It comes from my first husband, James Thompson, who died in 1952 after 8 months of marriage. I know this will come as a shock, and I'm sorry I never found the courage to tell you about James while I was alive."
Mama went on to explain that she'd loved James with a youthful intensity that had nearly destroyed her when she lost him, but that she'd also loved Daddy with a mature, steady devotion that had given her the family and stability she'd needed to heal. She wrote, "I never wanted any of you to think that your father was my second choice or that our family was somehow less than my first marriage. James and your father were different kinds of love in my heart, and both were equally precious to me." She explained that she'd kept James's money separate because she'd always felt it belonged to him, not to her, and that she'd wanted to preserve it as a legacy for the family they'd never had the chance to create together. "James would have wanted children," she wrote, "and I know he would have loved each of you as his own if he'd lived to meet you. This money is his gift to the grandchildren he never had, given with love from beyond the grave." The letter ended with instructions about the wedding dress and rings I'd found. "Dorothy, you were always the one who loved old things and family history. I want you to have my wedding dress from James, not because I value it more than my marriage to your father, but because it represents a part of my heart that I could never share with anyone while I was alive. Wear it if it brings you joy, or pass it down to your daughters if they'd like it. Just remember that it carries the love of 2 good men who both wanted nothing more than to see their families happy." Y'all, I'm standing there in the bank lobby crying over this letter and finally understanding why Mama had seemed so sad sometimes, especially around holidays or anniversaries. She'd been carrying the weight of 2 marriages, 2 loves, and a secret that she thought would hurt the people she cared about most. But all she'd really been guilty of was loving too much, too deeply, and not knowing how to honor both the dead and the living without hurting anyone. Patricia told me that the trust funds had grown to over $400,000, money that Mama had carefully managed for decades with the help of a financial advisor, always intending it as a surprise inheritance for her children and grandchildren. She'd been living modestly, not because she had to, but because she wanted to preserve James's legacy for future generations. Every penny of her own earnings with Daddy had gone toward raising us kids and building the life they'd shared together, while James's money had grown quietly in the background, waiting for this moment. Driving home from the bank that day, I felt like I finally understood my mama in a way I never had before. Those mysterious trips to town hadn't just been visits to James's grave. They'd been business trips to manage the trust funds, meetings with the financial advisor, and careful planning to ensure that James's memory would be honored long after she was gone. She'd spent 70 years being the executor of a dead man's will, making sure his love would somehow benefit the family he'd never had the chance to meet. That evening, I called Michael and our sister Sarah to tell them about the trust funds and Mama's letter. Sarah, who's 65 and lives up in Tampa, just started sobbing when I read her Mama's words. "I always wondered why Mama seemed so sad sometimes," Sarah said through her tears. "Now I understand. She was grieving a loss none of us even knew about." Michael was quiet for a long time before he said, "She carried that secret for all of us, Dorothy. She thought she was protecting our feelings, but really she was protecting James's memory too." The three of us decided that we needed to do something meaningful with James's inheritance, something that would honor both his memory and Mama's wishes. Sarah suggested that we use part of the money to establish a scholarship fund at the local community college for students who'd lost a spouse young, since Mama had always said that losing James had been like losing her whole future in one terrible moment. Michael thought we should donate some money to the Cancer Research Center at Sarasota Memorial Hospital, since better treatments might have saved James if they'd existed back in 1952. But I had a different idea, one that came to me while I was looking through more of Mama's things and found her old photo albums. Hidden between the pages of pictures of our family vacations and Christmas mornings were dozens of photographs of James that Mama had kept secret all these years. Pictures of him in his army uniform, laughing with friends, dancing with Mama at what looked like their engagement party. These weren't just wedding photos. They were evidence of a whole relationship, a whole love story that Mama had preserved in secret. I realized that Mama's greatest fear hadn't been that we'd judge her for having been married before. It was that we'd forget James entirely, that his life and love would disappear as if they'd never mattered. So I suggested that we use part of the inheritance to create a memorial garden at Sacred Heart Cemetery, with a bench where people could sit and remember loved ones they'd lost too soon. We'd have a plaque that said, "In memory of James Thompson and all those whose love lives on in the hearts of those they left behind." Y'all, when we presented this idea to the cemetery director, he told us something that made the whole project even more meaningful. Apparently, Mama had been asking about memorial gardens for years, always saying she wished there was a place where people could sit quietly and remember their loved ones in a beautiful setting. She'd even offered to help fund such a project, but the timing had never worked out. Now, with James's inheritance, we could finally make Mama's dream come true. The memorial garden was completed 6 months after Mama's funeral, and sweetie, it's the most peaceful place you've ever seen. There are flowering trees that bloom year-round here in Florida, comfortable benches positioned to catch the morning sun, and a small fountain with the sound of running water that Mama always said reminded her of the creek behind her childhood home in Ohio. The plaque we installed doesn't just mention James, it honors all those whose love transcends time and death. But the most special part of the memorial garden is something we discovered when we were going through the final details with the landscaper. He mentioned that an elderly woman had been coming to the cemetery for decades, always carrying a small watering can and tending to the plants around one particular gravesite. He said she was the most devoted widow I ever saw. Even when she got too old to kneel down and pull weeds, she'd still come every month with fresh flowers. That was Mama, of course, and when we told the landscaper about our memorial garden project, he got this big smile on his face. He He said, "You know what? That lady always talked about how she wished there were more places in the cemetery where people could sit and reflect on their loved ones. She used to say that grief needed room to breathe, that people needed beautiful spaces to process their loss. So our memorial garden wasn't just honoring James's memory, it was fulfilling Mama's own vision for how people should be able to grieve and remember." The dedication ceremony for the garden was held on June 15th, which would have been James and Mama's 72nd wedding anniversary. We invited the whole family, including grandchildren who were just learning about their grandmother's secret love story for the first time. My daughter Jennifer, who's 45, wore Mama's wedding dress to the ceremony, and honey, she looked absolutely radiant in it. The dress fit her perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years for the right moment to see sunshine again.
During the ceremony, I read portions of James's letters to Mama, the ones where he'd written about wanting her to find happiness again and raise the children they dreamed about together. "James," I said, looking at his headstone, "I want you to know that Evelyn did exactly what you asked her to do. She found love again. She raised beautiful children, and she lived a full, generous life, but she never forgot you, and she made sure your love would continue to bless future generations." We released white balloons at the end of the ceremony, one for James and one for Mama, and as they drifted up into that perfect Florida sky, I felt like both of them were finally at peace. Mama no longer had to carry the weight of her secret, and James's memory was no longer hidden away in a cedar chest. It was part of our family story now, honored and celebrated instead of whispered about in shame. The scholarship fund we established has already helped 12 young widows and widowers go back to school and rebuild their lives after devastating losses. Sarah oversees the applications, and she says that reading their stories has given her a whole new appreciation for Mama's strength and resilience. "Imagine losing the love of your life at 20, Sarah told me last week. Imagine having to start completely over, build a new identity, learn how to love again. Mama did all that and then spent 70 years protecting everyone else's feelings about it." Michael has been working with the Cancer Research Center, and they've used James's donation to fund a study specifically focused on the types of cancer that were untreatable in the 1950s but might be curable today. The lead researcher told him that advances in early detection and treatment mean that someone like James would have had an excellent chance of survival if he'd gotten sick in 2023 instead of 1952. "Your first stepfather's death wasn't in vain," the doctor said, "if it helps us save lives today." Y'all, I've been thinking a lot about secrets lately, about the things we hide from the people we love because we're trying to protect them. Mama thought she was sparing our feelings by never telling us about James, but really she was sparing herself the pain of reliving that loss over and over again every time she would have had to explain it. The secret wasn't about shame, it was about survival. She'd figured out how to build a wall around her grief so she could function as our mama, as Daddy's wife, as a productive member of the community. But secrets have a way of festering, don't they? All those years of hiding James's memory, of pretending that part of her heart didn't exist, of visiting his grave in secret like she was doing something wrong, it must have been exhausting. No wonder Mama seemed tired sometimes. No wonder she'd get that distant look in her eyes when she thought nobody was watching. She was living a double life, honoring one love in private while celebrating another love in public, never allowing herself the relief of just being honest about both. The thing is, if Mama had told us about James from the beginning, it wouldn't have changed how much we loved Daddy or how grateful we were for our family. It would have just made Mama more human, more complex, more interesting. We would have understood why she was so good at comforting other people through loss, why she always seemed to know exactly what to say when someone was grieving. Her secret pain had made her a better mother in some ways, more empathetic and patient with our problems because she knew what real heartbreak felt like.
I keep Mama's wedding dress in my own cedar chest now, wrapped in fresh tissue paper with lavender sachets, and sometimes I take it out just to admire the handiwork. Every bead was sewn on by hand, every seam finished with the kind of attention to detail you don't see anymore. This dress was made for a woman who expected to wear it only once, for the most important day of her life, and it was created to last forever. Just like Mama's love for James was created to last forever, even when everything else in her life changed. The letters from James are in a special box in my living room now, and I read them sometimes when I need to remember what true love looks like. He wrote to Mama like she was the most important person who had ever lived, like every day with her was a gift he couldn't quite believe he'd been given. Evelyn, darling, I wake up every morning and have to convince myself that you're really mine, that this happiness is really ours. Sometimes I think I must be dreaming, but then you smile at me, and I know that God has blessed me beyond what any man deserves. That's the kind of love that changes you, that leaves a mark on your soul that never fades even when the person is gone. Mama carried that mark for 70 years, and instead of seeing it as a burden, I've come to understand that it was actually a testament to her capacity for love. She didn't have a smaller heart because she'd loved James first. She had a bigger heart because she'd proven she could love deeply twice, could make room for both grief and joy, could honor the past while embracing the present. The memorial garden has become a popular spot in the cemetery, not just for people visiting specific graves, but for anyone who needs a quiet place to think. There's a guest book in a weatherproof box near the entrance, and people write the most beautiful messages about their own lost loved ones. One woman wrote, "Thank you for creating this space. I lost my husband last year and haven't known where to go to feel close to him. Sitting here among these flowers, I can finally breathe again." Another entry, written in a child's handwriting, says, "My grandpa died when I was little, but my mom brings me here to tell him about school and my friends. The flowers are pretty and I think he would like them." Reading these messages, I know that Mama's vision for a place where grief could breathe and love could be remembered has been fulfilled beyond what she ever imagined. The financial advisor who had been managing James's trust funds for Mama all these years told us something beautiful at our final meeting. He said that Mama had always referred to the investments as James's gift to the future, and that she had given very specific instructions about how the money should be used. He said, she wanted it to help people, but she also wanted it to honor the kind of man James had been, generous, forward-thinking, committed to making the world better. According to the advisor, Mama had researched every charity and organization before approving investments, making sure that James's money would be used in ways that aligned with his values. She had avoided companies that profited from war or suffering, and she had specifically sought out investments in healthcare, education, and social services. Even in managing a dead man's money, Mama had found ways to let his character shine through. Y'all, I've learned so much about love and loss and secrets in these past months, but the most important thing I've learned is that Mama wasn't keeping James hidden because she was ashamed of loving him. She was keeping him sacred. In her mind, their love story was too precious, too perfect, too fragile to expose to the everyday world of family arguments and practical concerns and the messiness of real life.
James existed in Mama's heart as pure love, untouched by the disappointments and compromises that come with long marriages. He never had to worry about paying bills or disciplining children or dealing with in-laws or any of the 1,000 little irritations that test a relationship over decades. In Mama's memory, he remained the passionate young husband who wrote her poetry and told her she was more beautiful than spring flowers and promised to love her forever. But Daddy, sweet Daddy who raised us kids and held Mama's hand through 48 years of real life, he got the harder job of loving Mama through menopause and teenagers and financial stress and aging parents and all the unglamorous parts of a real partnership. He loved her when she was tired and cranky, when she was worried about us kids, when she was sad for reasons she couldn't explain. That's not a lesser love than what James gave her.
It's a different kind of love, deeper and more tested and more practical. I think Mama understood this difference, which is why she was able to love both men without betraying either one. James got her young, passionate, hopeful heart, and Daddy got her mature, steady, committed heart. Both loves were real, both were precious, and both deserved to be honored. The tragedy wasn't that she'd loved twice. It was that she felt she had to choose between honoring one or the other. The last thing I found in Mama's belongings was a journal she'd kept during the final years of her life, and reading it gave me insight into how she'd finally made peace with her secret. In an entry dated just 6 months before she died, she wrote, "I've decided that love is not a finite resource. Loving James completely didn't make me love Robert any less. Having been James's wife didn't make me a worse wife to Robert. If anything, losing James taught me not to take love for granted, to cherish every ordinary moment with Robert, to be grateful for every year we had together." She wrote about visiting James's grave and talking to him about our family, about his inheritance growing over the decades, about her hope that someday we'd understand why she'd kept him hidden. "James, my darling," she wrote, "I think Dorothy will find our story someday, and I hope she'll understand that keeping you secret wasn't about shame. It was about preservation. I wanted to keep your memory perfect and untouched, like that wedding dress I've saved all these years." In her final entry, Mama wrote, "I'm not afraid to die, because I know I'll see James again. But I'm also not eager to leave Robert and the children." That's the blessing and the curse of having loved deeply twice. Your heart is pulled in two directions, even at the end. But I think that's okay. I think hearts are meant to be pulled and stretched and filled beyond what seems possible. Love is the one thing that gets bigger the more you give it away. Y'all, standing here in Mama's empty house, surrounded by boxes of her belongings and memories of her secret love story, I feel like I understand something important about the human heart that I never knew before. We're all capable of loving more deeply and more completely than we think we are. We're all carrying stories and secrets and precious memories that shape who we are in ways other people might never understand. Mama spent 70 years thinking she was protecting us from a complicated truth, but really, she was just protecting herself from having to relive the most beautiful and painful experience of her young life over and over again. The wedding dress in that cedar chest wasn't hidden because she was ashamed of it. It was preserved because it represented a love so pure and complete that it needed to be kept safe from the world. Now that dress hangs in my daughter's closet, waiting for the right occasion to see the light of day again. Jennifer says she might wear it to renew her wedding vows with her husband next year, and honey, I think James would love that. His gift to Mama, kept safe all these years, will celebrate another couple's love and commitment. That's exactly the kind of beautiful circle that Mama would have appreciated. The money James left behind has grown into a legacy that's already touching lives he never could have imagined. Scholarships for young widows, cancer research that might save other husbands, a memorial garden where people can find peace in their grief. His love for Mama, instead of dying with him in 1952, has been multiplied and shared and transformed into blessings for people he never met. And Mama's love for James, instead of being a secret burden she carried alone, has become part of our family's story of resilience and hope and the amazing capacity of the human heart to survive loss and find love again. Her secret life in Florida wasn't really secret at all. It was just private, sacred, preserved like a precious photograph that's too valuable to handle with everyday hands. Y'all, if there's anything I want you to take away from Mama's story, it's this. Love is never wasted, even when it ends in heartbreak. The love that James and Mama shared in their 8 months of marriage was so powerful that it sustained her through 70 years of life without him. It gave her the strength to start over, to love again, to raise a family, and to create a legacy that's still blessing people today. And if you're carrying secrets about love you've lost, or choices you've made, or pain you've endured, maybe it's time to consider that those secrets might be treasures instead of burdens. Maybe they're not things to be ashamed of, but experiences that have made you stronger, wiser, more capable of understanding other people's pain. Mama's wedding dress is beautiful, but is not more beautiful than the love story it represents, a story of passion and loss and survival and hope that spans 70 decades and touches 3 generations. That's the real treasure she left us, not the money or the dress or even the letters, but the knowledge that love is possible even after devastating loss, that hearts can heal and love again without betraying what came before. I've been wearing James's engagement ring on a chain around my neck ever since I found it, and sometimes I catch myself touching it when I'm thinking about Mama or when I'm facing a difficult decision. It reminds me that love is worth fighting for, worth preserving, worth honoring, even when the world doesn't understand. Mama fought to keep James's memory alive for 70 years, and now it's my turn to make sure their story isn't forgotten. The cemetery director called me last week to tell me that the memorial garden has become one of the most visited spots in the entire cemetery. People drive from counties away to sit on those benches and remember their loved ones. And honey, there's something magical about knowing that James and Mama's love story has created a place where other people can process their own grief and find their own peace. But you know what the most beautiful part of this whole story is, sweetie? 3 months ago, I got a letter from a young woman named Jessica who'd read about our memorial garden in the local newspaper. She'd lost her husband in Afghanistan just 8 months after their wedding, and she'd been struggling with whether to remarry a wonderful man she'd met 2 years later. She was tormented by guilt, feeling like loving someone new would betray her first husband's memory. Jessica wrote, "Reading about your mama's story gave me permission to love again. If she could honor her first husband while building a beautiful life with your father, then maybe I can honor my first husband while accepting this new love I found. Your mama proved that the heart is big enough for both grief and joy, for both remembering and moving forward." Y'all, when I read that letter, I knew that Mama's secret had finally served its purpose. For 70 years, she'd carried the burden of loving twice, of honoring both the dead and the living, of keeping James's memory sacred while building a real life with Daddy. But now her story was helping other people navigate the same impossible choices, showing them that love doesn't diminish when it's shared, that hearts don't break permanently when they're broken with love. Jessica came to visit the memorial garden last month, bringing her fiancé with her, and they sat on the bench that overlooks James's grave while she told him about her first husband. She said it was the first time she'd been able to talk about her late husband without feeling guilty about her new relationship. And her fiancé told her he was honored to love a woman whose heart was big enough to hold both past and future love. They're planning to have their wedding reception at the community center that Mama used to volunteer at, and they're asking guests to make donations to our scholarship fund instead of giving traditional wedding gifts. Jessica said she wants her new marriage to somehow honor the young widows and widowers who are still learning how to love again after loss. That's exactly the kind of beautiful legacy Mama would have wanted James's money to create. The cancer research project funded by James's inheritance has led to a breakthrough in early detection methods that could save thousands of lives in the coming years. When the research team published their findings, they dedicated the paper to James Thompson and all those whose battles with cancer inspire us to never stop fighting. Mama would have been so proud to see James's name in a medical journal, contributing to the kind of scientific progress that might have saved his life if it had existed in 1952. Michael has started volunteering at a grief support group at Sacred Heart Church, helping other people who've lost spouses navigate the practical and emotional challenges of widowhood. He says that understanding Mama's experience with losing James has made him a better listener, more patient with people who are struggling to move forward after devastating loss. Now I understand why she was always so good at helping people through funerals and family crises, he told me. She'd been there herself, in the darkest place grief can take you. Sarah has been working with the church to create a special ministry for young widows and widowers, providing everything from financial counseling to child care assistance to just a safe place where people can talk about their lost loves without judgment. The ministry is called James's Garden, and it's already helped 37 people in the past year. Sarah says the most rewarding part is watching people realize they're not alone, that other people have survived similar losses and found ways to build meaningful lives again. Y'all, I never expected that cleaning out Mama's belongings would lead to all this. Scholarships and research projects and support groups and memorial gardens and young couples finding the courage to love again. But that's the thing about love, isn't it, sweetie? It multiplies in ways you can't predict, touches lives you never imagined, creates ripples that spread far beyond what seems possible. Mama thought she was keeping James' secret to protect our family, but really, she was preserving his love until the right moment when it could bless the maximum number of people. His inheritance has grown for 70 years, waiting for this moment when it could fund cancer research and education and healing spaces. His memory has been kept safe in Mama's heart for 7 decades, waiting for this moment when it could inspire other people to believe in love after loss. The wedding dress hanging in my daughter's closet isn't just a beautiful gown anymore. It's a symbol of hope, proof that love stories don't end when people die, that the best parts of what we share with others can live on in ways we never expected. When Jennifer wears that dress to renew her vows, she'll be celebrating not just her own marriage, but the enduring power of all love to transcend time and loss and even death itself. I've started keeping a journal like Mama did, writing down the stories of people who've been touched by James's legacy and Mama's secret love story. There's the 75-year-old man who visits the memorial garden every week to talk to his wife who died of cancer 5 years ago. There's the young mother who received one of our scholarships and is now studying to become a grief counselor. There's the couple who got engaged sitting on the bench overlooking James's grave, saying they wanted to start their life together in a place that celebrated eternal love. Every entry in that journal is proof that Mama's instincts were right. Love is too precious to waste, too powerful to contain, too important to let die with the people who created it. James and Mama's 8-month marriage has now blessed more lives than some relationships that last 50 years because their love was preserved and honored and finally shared with the world when the time was right. The financial advisor who helped Mama manage James's inheritance told me something I'll never forget. He said that in 40 years of managing money for clients, he'd never seen anyone as thoughtful about the legacy of their investments as Mama was. She would spend hours researching every charity, every cause, making sure that James's money would be used in ways that reflected his values and character. She treated that inheritance like a sacred trust, not just money to be spent. That's what real love looks like, isn't it, sweetie? It's not just about the feelings between two people. It's about the commitment to honor and protect and multiply those feelings even when one person is gone. Mama didn't just grieve James and move on. She stewarded his memory and his resources for 70 years, making sure that his brief life would have lasting impact on the world. Standing here in Mama's empty bedroom, looking at the place where I found that cedar chest that changed everything I thought I knew about our family, I feel overwhelmed with gratitude. Not just for the money James left us, but for the beautiful love story I discovered, for the lesson Mama taught us about the true nature of love and loyalty and the human heart's infinite capacity for both grief and joy. She could have spent James's inheritance decades ago. She could have used it to make her own life easier, to buy a nicer house or take fancy vacations, or spoil her grandchildren. Instead, she lived modestly and let that money grow and multiply, trusting that someday it would serve a purpose bigger than her own comfort. That's not just financial wisdom, that's spiritual wisdom. The understanding that love is meant to be shared and multiplied, not hoarded. The last time I visited James's grave, I brought him a letter I'd written to him, thanking him for loving Mama so completely that it sustained her through 70 years without him. I told him about our children and grandchildren, about the life Mama had built with Daddy, and about all the ways his inheritance was now blessing people he'd never met. I felt silly talking to a headstone, but I also felt like somehow, in some way I don't pretend to understand, he was listening. "James," I said, kneeling beside that simple granite marker, "I want you to know that Evelyn kept her promise to you. She found love again, she raised the children you dreamed about together, and she lived a full, generous, beautiful life. But she never forgot you, and she made sure your love would outlive both of you. You're part of our family now, not as a secret, but as a blessing, and we're going to make sure your story is remembered."
The sun was setting over Sarasota Bay that evening, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have made Mama smile. And for the first time since I discovered her secret, I felt complete peace about everything that had happened. Mama's long journey of loving and grieving and protecting and preserving was finally over, and James's love had found its way back into the light where it belonged. Y'all, if you're still with me after this long story, I hope you'll remember that love is never wasted. Secrets aren't always about shame, and the human heart is capable of more beauty and strength and generosity than we ever imagine. Mama's secret life in Florida wasn't about deception. It was about devotion, the kind of deep, abiding commitment to love that transforms grief into blessing and loss into legacy. That wedding dress and the cedar chest wasn't hidden because Mama was ashamed of it. It was preserved because it represented something too precious to risk damaging. James's letters weren't kept secret because Mama was being dishonest. They were treasured because they contained love too pure to share with a world that might not understand. The money wasn't hoarded because Mama was selfish. It was protected because she knew it had a destiny bigger than her own needs. And now, finally, all of it is serving the purpose it was always meant to serve, proving that love transcends death, that generosity multiplies when it's planted in good soil, and that the best parts of who we are live on in the lives we touch and the legacy we leave behind. Mama spent 50 years hiding her wedding dress, but honey, some things are worth the wait. Some love stories need time to ripen, time to grow, time to find their perfect moment to inspire the world. James and Mama's love story waited 70 years to be told, but now it's touching lives in ways they never could have imagined when they danced at their wedding reception in that little church in Cleveland all those decades ago. If there's a moral to this story, sweetie, it's that love is patient, love is eternal, and love always finds a way to bless the world, even when it seems lost forever. Mama's secret life in Florida has become our family's greatest treasure, not because it was hidden, but because it was finally revealed at exactly the right moment to do the most good for the most people. And that, y'all, is why she kept that wedding dress for 50 years, because some love is too beautiful to let go, too powerful to keep completely secret, and too precious to waste on anything less than changing the world.